The carriage came down the cliff road as the bells of Caldern rang noon, and the whole of the household had been turned out to greet it. They formed up in 2 ragged lines across the cobbled yard, fidgeting in their Sunday best, the footman already sweating in livery too warm for the salt wind that came off the grey Cornish sea. The great house stood pale and severe behind them, and the gulls wheeled and complained over the cliffs, and every eye went to the turn of the road where the wheels were coming. Mara Ashby had chosen the very end of the line on purpose, where the gatehouse threw its shadow. 3 times that morning she had pinned her cap low, until not a strand of her hair showed, hair that had been corn-silk once, and that she dulled now with rinses of walnut and tea, though the grey threads in it were her own, and owed nothing to any bottle. She kept her face turned down the way she had trained herself to do, hiding the thinness that want had carved into it, the hollows that did not belong to the laughing girl of 20. She rounded her shoulders. She made of herself something small and unremarkable that no eye would pause upon, and she waited, and she did not look up the road. 7 years had passed since she had last seen the man who was coming down the cliff road. She told herself that 7 years was a great deal of time. She told herself that he had loved a laughing girl in pale muslin who held her chin high, and that no such girl existed any more, and that the woman who stood in the gatehouse shadow with a darning needle in her apron pocket was a stranger he had never met. She told herself these things, and her heart beat against her ribs like a bird against a window all the same. Beside her, holding to a fistful of her skirt, stood her son. Toby was 6 years old, and he was small for it, with a thatch of dark hair that would not lie down, and a pair of grey eyes that took in everything and forgot nothing. He had a way of standing very straight when he meant to be brave, and he was standing very straight now because his mother had told him that a great gentleman was coming, and Toby had decided that a great gentleman was an opportunity. For Toby had a plan, and the plan concerned his mother, and the plan had cost him 3 sleepless nights to perfect. His mother had been coughing. She had been coughing for a fortnight, a dry, deep cough that doubled her over the washing tub at night, when she thought he was asleep, and twice he had seen her press a cloth to her mouth and put it quickly away before he could look at it. The apothecary in the village sold a tonic of horehound and honey that was good for the chest. Toby knew this because Mrs. Tilney the housekeeper had said so, and Mrs. Tilney knew everything. The tonic cost a penny. Toby did not have a penny. Toby had never in his life had a penny that was wholly and entirely his own, but great gentlemen had pennies. Everybody said so. The carriage rolled into the yard, and the horses were brought to a stand, blowing and stamping, and a footman sprang to let down the step. There was a silence in which the whole household held its breath, and then the Duke of Hertmere stepped down into the yard of his own house for the first time in 3 years. Gabriel was a tall man, and the years had not bent him, but they had done something to his face that age alone could not do. He had gone away a young man with grief riding him hard, and he had come back with the grief grown quiet and deep, settled into him like cold into stone. His hair was dark, and the sea wind took it as he stepped down. His eyes moved over the assembled household without seeming to see any of them, the way a man's eyes move over furniture in a room he has lived in too long, and he drew his greatcoat closer against the wind and said something low to the steward at his elbow. And in that moment, before anyone could stop him, before his mother's hand could close on his collar, Toby let go of her skirt and walked out of the line. He walked straight across the cobbles to the tall, dark gentleman, and he went down on one knee on the cold stones the way he had practised in the loft, and he looked up the great height of the Duke of Hertmere and said, in a voice that carried clear across the silent yard, "Shine your boots for a penny, sir." The world stopped. Mara's heart stopped with it. She had her hand half out, her mouth half open on his name, and she could not move, could not breathe, could only stand frozen in the gatehouse shadow, while her whole life walked out into the light and knelt at the feet of the one man on earth who must never look at it. Gabriel looked down. He looked down at the small boy kneeling on the stones, at the dark hair that would not lie down, at the thin face turned up to him, grave as a judge, and at the grey eyes that met his own without the smallest flinch. For a long moment the Duke of Hertmere said nothing at all, and the household did not breathe, and the gulls cried out over the cliffs. "For a penny," Gabriel said at last. "Yes, sir." Toby did not look away. "I have a rag. It is a good rag. I washed it myself. I can do the toes very fine, sir, and the heel, though the heel takes longer, and you must stand still for it." A sound went through the watching servants, quickly stifled. The steward stepped forward with his face dark, ready to seize the boy and haul him off, but Gabriel lifted one gloved hand a bare inch, and the steward stopped where he stood. "And what," said Gabriel, "does a man do with a penny, that he should kneel on cold stones to earn it?" Toby considered this with great seriousness, as though it were a question of state. "He buys medicine, sir," he said. "There is a tonic of horehound for the chest. It is a penny the bottle. My mother coughs in the night and puts the cloth away so I shan't see, but I have seen, and the cloth is the wrong colour." He paused, and for the first time something moved in the grave little face, something that was fear held very still. "I should like to buy her the tonic before the cold weather comes. Mrs. Tilney says the cold is bad for a chest. So I am earning a penny, and you have very fine boots, sir, and they are dusty from the road. It is a fair bargain." There was a silence then of a different kind. Mara saw it move across the Duke's face, though she was too far to see it clearly, though her eyes were swimming so that she could scarcely see at all. She saw him go very still. She saw the gloved hand, still raised, close slowly into a fist and then open again, and she understood, with a mother's terror, that her son had reached past every defence the man possessed, and touched something that had not been touched in a very long time. "It is a fair bargain," Gabriel agreed, and his voice had gone rough. "But I find I cannot let you spoil that good rag on a wet day, and these stones are too cold for kneeling. Stand up." Toby stood up. "You shall have your penny," said the Duke, "and your tonic besides, and a physician to your mother before the cold comes, for a cough is not a thing to trust a horehound alone. No," as the boy's face began to cloud, "do not look so. The bargain stands. You shall shine my boots another day when the sun is out and the stones are dry, and you shall earn your penny honestly. But a man may also receive a gift when it is freely given, without shame. Do you understand me?" Toby thought about this. "That sounds like yes," he said slowly, but with longer words. And the Duke of Hertmere, who had not laughed in 3 years, laughed. It was not a long laugh, and it surprised him as much as anyone. It broke from him short and startled, and then was gone. But it had been there, and the whole household had heard it. Mara heard it. She knew that laugh as she knew her own breathing. She had fallen asleep beside that laugh 100 nights, a lifetime ago, in another world. She pressed her knuckles hard against her mouth and stepped back further into the shadow, and her eyes burned, and somewhere in the great cold knot of her fear, a single terrible warmth had kindled that she could not put out. "Whose child is this?" Gabriel asked, looking up, looking along the lines of servants. "Where is his mother?" And Mara Ashby came out of the gatehouse shadow, because there was nothing else to be done, with her cap pinned low, and her eyes upon the cobbles and her son's name on her lips, and she did not lift her face to the man she had loved and lost and fled, not once, not for anything, though it cost her everything she had. "Here, your grace," she said. "Forgive him. He is too bold by half. He shall be punished for it." "He shall not," said Gabriel. She kept her eyes down. She made of her voice the flat, dull voice of a servant, and she pitched it low. "He meant no harm, your grace." "I am aware of what he meant," the Duke said quietly. "I have never in my life been offered anything half so honest." He was looking at her now. She could feel it, the weight of his gaze on her bent head, and she stood with her shoulders rounded and her hands folded, and prayed to a God she had stopped believing in to make him look away. "Your name?" "Mara Ashby, your grace. I do the mending." There was a pause. "Ashby," he repeated, and there was something in the way he said it, something searching, something that turned over the plain name, as a man turns over a stone to see what lies beneath. "Have we met before, Mistress Ashby?" "No, your grace." The lie came smooth and quick, worn down by years of practice. "I came to the hall after the old Duke's time. You would not have seen me." "No," he said slowly. "No, I suppose I would not." But still he did not look away, and when at last he turned and went up the steps into his house, with Toby trotting at his side answering some question, Mara stood in the yard with her heart slamming, and knew that the worst thing she had ever feared had begun, and that it had begun with her son's voice, and that there was no calling it back now. He summoned her to his study before the day was out. The message came by way of a footman, courteous and unanswerable. His Grace would speak with Mistress Ashby at her convenience, which she understood at once to mean now. She climbed the stairs with her heart in her throat and her cap pinned low, and she stood just inside the door with her hands folded and her eyes upon the carpet, and she made of herself once more the small grey thing that no eye lingered upon. The summons was a courtesy, and she felt the courtesy close over her like a net drawn soft and slow. Gabriel stood at the window with his back to her, looking out at the grey heave of the sea. "The boy is with my physician," he said, without turning. "He has gone down on the pretext of admiring the boats, so the child shall not know he is being physicked. Your son is proud, I think, and would not take charity if he were told its name." He paused. "Nor, I suspect, would his mother. So I have not offered her any. I have only sent a man to look at a cough, which any decent house would do for its own." "You are very good, Your Grace," she said to the carpet. "I am not, particularly." He turned then, and she felt his gaze come to rest upon her bent head, and she did not lift it, not for anything. "Mistress Ashby, when you stood in the yard today I had the strangest sensation, and I have not been able to put it from me since. I felt that I knew you, not your face. You take great care I should not see your face, but something else, the set of your shoulders, the way you fold your hands, so, as though you were holding something shut." A silence in which the fire shifted. "I knew a woman once who stood as you stand. She has been 7 years in the ground." Mara's folded hands tightened upon each other until the knuckles whitened. "I am sorry for your grief, Your Grace," she said, and made her voice flat and dull and servantish, and hated the ease of the lie even as it left her. "But I never had the honour of it. I am a needlewoman. I came down the coast after the old Duke's time. We have not met." "No," he said slowly. "No, you would tell me surely if we had. But it was not quite a question, and it was not quite belief, and she felt the strand of it settle over her soft and terrible. You may go. See that the boy keeps warm tonight. The wind is turning. And Mistress Ashby—" She had reached the door, her hand already on the latch. "You need not pin your cap so low beneath this roof. No one in my house will harm you. You have my word on it." She went out with his kindness lodged in her like a blade she did not know how to dodge, and she did not breathe freely again until the door of the loft was shut behind her. That night she sat in the little room under the eaves that she shared with Toby, and she watched him sleep, and Mrs. Tilney came and sat with her, and they did not speak for a long while. "He's sent for the physician from Truro," the housekeeper said at last. "For your chest. There's beef tea coming up from the kitchen, and the apothecary's lad rode out before dark with the tonic and 3 bottles besides. Your boy's name is on the steward's book now, for a new coat against the winter." She folded her hands. "He doesn't do such things, the Duke. He hasn't done such a thing in all the years I've kept this house. Not since the young mistress that was meant for him went away." Mara said nothing. She was looking at the candle. "You've gone white as the sheet," Mrs. Tilney observed. "Mara, you and I have kept each other's quiet a long while, and I've never once asked you what you ran from. I'm asking nothing now. But that man looked at you in the yard today like a man who's seen a ghost and can't think where he buried it. So I'll say only this, and then I'll hush. Whatever it is you're hiding from, it walked into this house today with longer legs than it had this morning." Mara reached out and smoothed the dark hair back from her sleeping son's brow, and her hand was trembling. "His name was the Bargain," she whispered. "I only ever wanted to keep him fed." The next weeks were the cruelest she had known, because they were so nearly happy. It began with the coat. It was made of good grey wool with a collar that buttoned to the chin, and it was a little too large because Mrs. Tilney had told the tailor a growing boy will fill it by spring, and Toby walked about in it for 2 days as though he had been crowned. And it would have been a small thing, a kindness from a great house to a servant's child, except that the Duke had seen him shiver on the quay, and the Duke remembered, and the Duke began, without ever quite deciding to keep the boy near him. For Gabriel had taken to walking down to the boathouse in the mornings. He had sailed as a boy. The little cutter still hung in its slings in the boathouse, dusty, its lines rotted, and one grey morning he went down and looked at it for a long time. And the next morning Toby found him there, and after that there was no keeping the boy away. Gabriel taught him the names of the ropes. He taught him to coil a line so it would run free and not foul, to make a cleat hitch, to feel the wind on the back of his neck and know from it which way the boat would want to go. He sent to the village for new cordage and a bolt of sailcloth, and he sat on an upturned barrel in the cold, salt dimness of the boathouse, with a marlin spike in his hand and a small boy at his knee, and he was patient in a way that astonished the servants who carried tales of it back up to the hall. "He told me," Toby reported to his mother, breathless, his cheeks wind-stung, "that a sailor is never afraid of the wind because the wind doesn't care if you're afraid, so you may as well not bother being it. And he told me the names of the stars you steer by, and he said, when the boat is mended, he will take me out past the point if you say I may. May I, mother? May I?" "We shall see," said Mara, which Toby had long ago learned was a word adults used when they were afraid of something, and he looked at her, this child who forgot nothing, and he said nothing more about it that day, but he confided in the Duke instead, because the Duke listened. "My mother is afraid of the sea," he told Gabriel one grey afternoon, sitting on the barrel while the man spliced an eye into a rope's end. "She is afraid of a great many things. She is afraid when men in fine clothes come to the hall. She makes us very quiet then, and we keep to the loft. I think something frightened her before I was born, but she will not say what. I am the only family she has." He frowned at the rope. "It is a great deal of family to be, when you are only one boy. Sometimes I should like there to be more of us, so it would not all sit on me." Gabriel's hands went still on the splice. "And your father?" he asked very carefully, very low. "I have not got one," said Toby simply. "He died before I was born, my mother says, and she does not like to speak of it, so I do not ask. But I think about him sometimes." He looked up, and the grey eyes were very like another pair of grey eyes, though the man before him did not see it, could not see it, would never have dreamed to look. "Do you think a man can miss someone he never met?" For a long moment the Duke did not answer. He was looking out the open boathouse door at the grey heave of the sea, and something had moved in his face that the boy was too young to read. "Yes," Gabriel said at last. "I think a man can miss someone he never met. I think it may be the loneliest missing there is." And up the path, half hidden by the gorse, Mara stood with a basket of mending forgotten on her arm, and watched the two dark heads bent together over a rope in the dim of the boathouse, her son and his father, laughing now at some small thing, and she felt her heart break and mend and break again in the same breath, because she had given Toby this hunger by taking his father from him, and now she watched him feed it from a hand that did not know what it gave, and there was no way under heaven that it could end except in ruin. The ruin, when it came, wore silk. Sir Edmund Crail had come down to Caldern for the winter, as he came every winter, and he had brought his daughter. He had been the late Duke's man of business, the trustee of the Hartmere estates, through Gabriel's long minority and his longer absence, and he moved through the great house with the soft, sure tread of a man who believed, in the deepest chamber of his heart, that all of it was nearly his. He was a handsome man still, silver at the temples, courteous to the lowest scullery maid, and he had spent 7 years arranging the world so that his daughter Cordelia should one day be Duchess of Hartmere, and he did not intend to see that arrangement spoiled now by a seamstress and her brat. Lady Cordelia was beautiful and bored and sharp as a paper's edge, and she had noticed the way the Duke's eyes followed the seamstress across a room, and she did not like it. She found Mara in the long gallery one afternoon, on her knees with a work-basket, mending the hem of a tapestry curtain, with Toby beside her sorting threads by colour into their proper coils. There were others present, 2 of Cordelia's friends, a footman, the chorus of any great house, and Cordelia had chosen her ground. "There it is," she said in a carrying voice to her companions, "the little needlewoman who has bewitched our Duke. Do look. One can scarcely credit it. They say she parades the child before him at every turn, on the quay, in the yard, underfoot wherever he walks. A clever woman knows that the surest road to a lonely man's bed is through his pity, and a fatherless child is pity made flesh." She smiled down at Mara's bent head. "Tell me, Mistress Ashby, whose was the boy before you found him so useful? Or did you not trouble to ask?" Mara did not look up. She had learned in 7 years to make of herself a stone the cruel words broke upon. Her hands went on with the needle. Steady, steady, and she said nothing, because to answer was to be ruined, and to be silent was only to be wounded, and she had survived a great many wounds. But Toby had stopped sorting his threads. He rose to his feet. He was very small in the great gallery, in his grey coat too large for him, and his face had gone white and his hands were shaking, but he stood very straight in the way he did when he meant to be brave, and he faced the beautiful sneering lady, and he spoke. "You are not to say that about my mother," he said. His voice shook and he made it go on anyway. "My mother is the best person there is. She does not parade me. I parade myself because I am bold, everyone says so, and that is my own fault and not hers. She has never asked the Duke for anything. She would not let him give her the tonic. I had to. She sat up all the nights I had the fever, and she did not sleep. Not once, I counted, and she sells her own bread to the gulls some mornings, and says she is not hungry so that I—" His voice cracked. "So, you are not to say it. You have a great many fine words, and they are all wrong, and that is worse than having no words at all." In his trembling, he had caught the edge of the work-basket, and it went over, and the spools and the mending, and the little coils of thread he had so carefully sorted, spilled across the floor in a bright ruin. And Toby looked down at them, and his lip trembled, and he did not cry, because he had decided long ago that he would not, but it was a near thing. The gallery had gone very quiet. "Well," said Cordelia into the silence, but something had gone out of her voice. "Yes," said the Duke of Hertmere from the doorway. "Well, indeed." No one had heard him come. He stood in the arch of the gallery door, and his face was terrible in its quiet, and he came forward into the room, and he did not look at Cordelia at all. He went down on one knee on the floor among the spilled threads beside the small white-faced boy, and he began gravely with his own 2 hands to gather up the spools. "You sorted these by colour," he observed. "That was well done. We shall sort them so again." He set a blue spool in the basket, and a red, and his voice when he spoke went out across the gallery clear and level and cold as the sea. "Hear me, all of you, for I shall say it but the once. This child and his mother are under my protection and the protection of my house. To offer them insult is to offer it to me. To question her honour is to question my judgment, and I am not a man whose judgment is questioned twice beneath his own roof." He rose, with the basket in his hands, and now he looked at Cordelia, and she went pale. "You are a guest at Caldern, Lady Cordelia. I should be sorry to remember that a guest may also depart." He set the basket into Mara's hands. For one instant his fingers brushed hers, and she felt it go through her like lightning down a mast, and she looked up before she could stop herself, full into his face, and his eyes met hers and held a moment too long. Something flickered far back in them, some half-memory struggling toward the light, and she saw it, and she dropped her gaze and turned away with her heart roaring. But she knew that the thing she had buried was clawing its way up out of the ground, and that it would not be buried again. The storm came 3 nights later. It came up out of the southwest at dusk, a great Atlantic gale that flung the sea against the cliffs until the very floors of the hall trembled, and the rain came at the windows like fistfuls of gravel, and one by one the candles guttered in the draughts that found their way through every old casement. The household drew in upon itself. Toby, who had taken a chill from the cold gallery, was put to bed early in the loft with a hot stone wrapped at his feet, and when he was sleeping, Mara could not bear the small close room and the listening dark, and she went down the back stairs to the still room to fetch a fresh candle and a measure of the broth that was kept warm there through the night. The still room was warm and dim, and smelled of dried herbs and beeswax. The storm was a great muffled roaring beyond the thick walls, and Mara, alone, with her guard down for the first time in weeks, did a thing she had not done in years. She began, very softly, to sing. It was an old song, a Cornish thing, a lullaby of the sea that the fisherwives sang, about a sailor coming home across the water to a light left burning in a window. She had sung it to Toby every night of his life. She had learned it long ago, in a summer that seemed now to belong to someone else, from a young man who had carried her down to a different shore and taught her the words with his mouth against her hair. She sang it low, over the warm broth, with her eyes half closed and her cap laid aside on the table, and her dark hair loose about her thin face, and she did not hear the door. Gabriel had come down for the same broth, sleepless, with the storm in his blood. He stopped in the doorway. He stood in the dark of the passage, and he heard the song. and the song reached into him and took hold of something that had lain 7 years in its grave, and his face went the colour of ash. He knew that song. He had taught that song. He had sung it with his mouth in a girl's bright hair on a beach in another lifetime, before grief and absence and the long cold years. And he stood in the dark, and he looked at the woman bent over the candle with her hair loose and her cap laid by, and the firelight was on her face, and the thinness and the darkened hair and the 7 years fell away from her all at once like a garment dropped, and underneath was a face he had mourned until morning had hollowed him out. "Seraphina," he said. The name fell into the room like a stone into a still pool. Mara went rigid. The song died on her lips. She did not turn. She could not. She sat with her back to him, and her hands gripping the table's edge, and her whole body gone to stone, and the storm roared beyond the walls, and the candle flames stood up tall and trembling in the draught from the open door. "Seraphina Vane," said Gabriel, and his voice was not steady at all now. He came into the room. "Turn around. For the love of God, turn around and tell me I have run mad, that it is the storm and the dark and an old song, that you are a stranger and I am a fool. Turn around and let me see your face and call you a stranger, Mistress Ashby, and I shall beg your pardon and never trouble you again." Slowly, slowly Mara turned. She lifted her face into the candlelight and let him see her, all of her, the woman she had become and the girl she had been beneath it, and she watched the last of his doubt die, and she said, in her own voice, the voice she had buried with her name, "You were not meant to know me, Gabriel." He did not move. He could not seem to move. He stood with the table between them, and his hands at his sides, and his face working, and 7 years of grief turned slowly over inside him and showed its other face, which was rage, and its other face again, which was a wild and terrible hope. "You are alive," he said. "All this while, you are alive, and you have been under my roof mending my linen, hiding your face from me in the yard. And your boy—" He stopped. The colour drained from him entirely. "Your boy, Seraphina. How old is your boy?" "Gabriel. How old is he?" 6 years, she said. "He will be 7 in the spring." The still room was very quiet beneath the roaring of the storm. 6 years, Gabriel repeated, and she watched the arithmetic of it move through him, watched it arrive, watched it strike him like a wave that takes a man off his feet. He reached out and set one hand flat upon the table as though the floor had tilted. "His eyes," he said hoarsely. "I sat with that child 100 hours, and I never once. His eyes are my mother's eyes. Seraphina, tell me plainly, and do not spare me. Whose son is that boy asleep in your loft?" And Seraphina Vane stood up and faced the only man she had ever loved, and gave him at last the truth she had carried alone for 7 years. "He is yours," she said. "I carried your child beneath my heart through the whole long winter after you cast me off, and I bore him alone in a fishing village where no one knew my name, and I have raised him alone every day of his life, and he is the best of everything we ever were to one another, and he does not know your face is his face. He is your son, Gabriel. He has been your son all this while, kneeling on your cobbles, begging you for a penny." Gabriel made a sound she had never heard a man make. "Cast you off," he said. "Cast you, Seraphina. I never cast you off. I came for you. Do you hear me? I came for you. I rode to your father's house with the license in my coat, and they told me you were gone, fled in the night, that you had left a letter saying you would not be bought, that you despised me, that you had taken a passage abroad and forbidden any to follow. I tore that house apart. I searched 2 years. I crossed to France on a rumour and a lie. I came back and put on the black, and I have worn it in my heart every day since, and you tell me you fled because I cast you off." His voice broke entirely. "What letter? What letter, Seraphina? I wrote you no letter." The floor seemed to drop away beneath her. "You wrote to me," she whispered, "in your own hand. I knew your hand. You said you had come to your senses, that a duke could not wed a trustee's daughter, that it had been a summer's foolishness, and I was to forget you, that there was money settled to keep me quiet, and I was to trouble you no more. I read it on my knees in the orchard. I read it 100 times. I burned it because I could not bear to own it. And I ran, because I would not stay to be paid off like a—" She pressed her hand to her mouth. "It was your hand, Gabriel. I would have sworn it before God." "I wrote no letter," he said again, and now there was something cold and growing in his voice, something that turned away from her toward a darkness neither of them had yet named. "And you wrote none to me. 2 letters, Seraphina, that neither of us wrote, and 7 years, and a son I have only this night learned to grieve. 2 false letters in 2 false hands." He was very still now, and his eyes had gone hard as flint. "Who carried your post in your father's house? Who held my father's seal, and my correspondence, and the keeping of all this estate while I was a green boy, and then a grieving one an ocean away?" She stared at him. "Edmund Crail," she said. "Edmund Crail," said the Duke of Hertmere, "whose daughter was to be my wife." And he laughed, but there was no laughter in it at all, only the long, cold sound of a man looking back across 7 ruined years, and seeing, at last, the hand that ruined them. He had the means. He had the hand for it. I have seen him ape another man's writing for a jest. And he had, by God, the reason. Your father was an obstacle, and he broke him. You were an obstacle, and he frightened you to the ends of the earth. And I was the prize, to be kept lonely and pliable and grieving, until his Cordelia could be set in the empty place. His hands had closed into fists. 7 years. He stole 7 years and a son from me with a pot of ink. Gabriel. She came round the table now, afraid of the thing she saw rising in him. "Gabriel, listen to me. If you go to him now in the dark, and the storm with this in your face, you will have nothing but his denial, and he will burn whatever is left to burn, and we will never prove it. And Toby must not be a weapon between you. Promise me, whatever you do, the boy comes first. He must not be touched by this until it is finished and done and safe. Promise me that, and I will tell you everything I know, and we will pull this evil up by the root together. But not tonight, not in anger, not at the cost of him." For a long moment the storm raged, and the Duke of Hertmere stood with his fists clenched and his dead 7 years burning in his eyes. And then, slowly, he mastered himself, because she was right, and because the look on her face was the look of a woman who had spent 7 years putting her child before her own heart, and he would not be the one to teach her that her trust in him was misplaced a second time. "I promise you," he said, "the boy comes first. He will not know until it is safe to know." He looked at her, and all the hardness went out of his face, and left only the grief and the wonder. "Seraphina, I mourned you. I never wrote those words. Whatever was done to us, know that much before anything else. I never once stopped. Don't," she said, and her voice broke. "Don't, Gabriel. Not yet. I cannot bear it yet. There is too much I have carried too long. Let us pull up the root first. Then we shall see what is left growing." He bowed his head. "Then we shall see," he said. He went after the root quietly, the way a wise man stalks dangerous game. He let it be known, idly, over the wine, that he meant to have his late father's correspondence and the old estate papers brought up out of the muniment room and put in order before the new year, that there were accounts he had a fancy to review going back to his minority. He said it lightly, as a man speaks of a tedious duty. He watched Crail's face as he said it, and saw nothing there but courteous interest, for Crail was a master, but he watched the man's hands, and the hands went still upon the stem of his glass a half-second too long. Within 2 days a footman who had served as Crail's clerk was gone from the hall, fled in the night without his wages, and the great iron dispatch box that held the late Duke's sealed correspondence was found to bear fresh, bright scratches about its lock, where someone had worked at it in haste and failed, for Gabriel had quietly had the only key upon his own person since the night of the storm. Mrs. Tilney came to him with her own gleanings, brisk and grim. "Her ladyship's maid," she said, "has been below stairs asking which is Mara Ashby's room, and does she sleep sound, and is there a lock upon the door? I've moved Mara and the boy to the blue chamber by my own, and I sleep light, and I keep the poker by the bed, your grace, and I'll thank that maid to try me." She fixed him with a hard eye. "I don't know the whole of it, and I don't ask, but that woman has been wronged in my house, and that child is the dearest thing in it, and whatever you're about, you'll be quick about it, for I don't like the smell of the wind." "Be patient a little longer, Mrs. Tilney," said the Duke. "Twelfth night. I have asked Sir Edmund and all the county besides to the ball at Twelfth night, and I have asked one other guest he does not expect, an old man who served as my father's copying clerk, who has no love for Crail, and a long memory and, as it happens, kept certain spoiled draughts that crossed his desk and were never burned. Be patient until Twelfth night, then it ends." And one evening he sought Crail out alone by the library fire, and made conversation of nothing, and then said idly, turning a paper knife in his fingers, "You knew the Vanes, did you not, Sir Edmund, in my father's day, the trustee and his daughter. There was some scandal, I forget the shape of it. The girl ran off, I think, and broke the old man. Whatever became of her?" And he watched, over the firelight, as Edmund Crail's smooth, handsome face held its courteous mask, and held it a fraction too long, while behind the eyes something cold and quick went hunting through 7 years for the trap. "Dead, I believe," said Crail smoothly. "Abroad. A sad business. Quite forgotten." "Quite forgotten," the Duke agreed pleasantly and smiled, and the paper knife turned in his fingers, and Crail watched it turn, and for the first time in 7 years Sir Edmund Crail was afraid. Twelfth night came down cold and clear, the storm long blown out, and a great moon riding over a sea gone still as black glass. The hall blazed with light. The county came up the cliff road in their carriages, furred and jewelled, and passed in under the holly and ivy, and the music rose to meet them, and Caldern Hall, which had stood dark and grieving for 7 years, shone out over the sea like a great ship lit for a voyage. Mara stood at the edge of it all in a gown of deep blue that Mrs. Tilney had pressed upon her, with her dark hair dressed plain and her chin for once not bowed. Gabriel had asked it of her. "Stand where I can see you," he had said. "Whatever comes, do not hide your face tonight." And Toby stood beside her in his grey coat, scrubbed and shining and wide-eyed at the lights, holding her hand, not yet knowing that his whole life was about to change in the space of an hour. The dancing had begun when the Duke of Hertmere walked out into the centre of the great room and lifted his hand, and the music faltered and stopped, and the bright company turned to him, and a hush ran out across the candle-lit floor. "My friends," he said, "forgive me. I shall not keep you long from the dancing, but I am newly come home to a house that has stood too long in shadow, and before this new year is an hour older, I find I have an old injustice to set right, and I would have it done before witnesses in the light, where such things should always be done." He turned, and at his nod a footman brought forward the great iron dispatch-box, and set it upon a table, and beside it came an old man, stooped and trembling, a clerk's stoop and a clerk's careful eyes, who had not been seen in that county in 20 years. Mara felt, rather than saw, Edmund Crail go very still across the room. "Many of you," said the Duke, "knew my father. Many of you knew that through my long minority and my longer absence the whole of the Hertmere estate, its papers, its moneys, and its correspondence, lay in the keeping of his trusted man of business, Sir Edmund Crail." He laid his hand upon the dispatch-box. "I have lately had occasion to read that correspondence, and I find within it, and within the memory of this honest old man who copied my father's letters for 30 years, the record of a crime. Your Grace." Crail's voice was smooth, but there was an edge beneath it now. "This is hardly the hour for the dull business of the estate. Your guests—" "Be silent," said Gabriel, without raising his voice, and the cold in it stopped Crail where he stood. He drew 2 papers from the box. "7 years ago I loved a gentlewoman, and meant to wed her, and she vanished in a night believing I had cast her aside, while I was given to believe that she had fled me in contempt. Each of us was shown a letter in the other's hand. Each letter was a forgery. I have here the spoiled drafts of both, recovered from this clerk's own keeping, blotted and begun again, in a hand that is neither hers nor mine, a hand that this man will swear to, and that any of you who have had a note of business from him these 20 years will know upon sight." And he read them aloud. He read the letter that had been sent to a frightened girl in her father's orchard, the cold paying off, the summer's foolishness, the money settled to keep her quiet, and Mara, hearing again across 7 years the words that had broken her life, swayed where she stood and gripped her son's hand, and did not fall. And he read the letter that had been sent to himself, the false farewell, the false contempt, the lie that had sent him grieving across an ocean. And then he held up the blotted drafts of both, the crossings out, the trial runs of another man's stolen handwriting, and the old clerk lifted his trembling voice and swore before the assembled county, whose hand had penned them, here in this house, at that man's desk. They were written, said the Duke of Hertmere, by Sir Edmund Crail, to part me from the woman I loved, to break her father, who stood in his way, and to keep me lonely and grieving and pliant, until he might set his own daughter in the place he had emptied. He stole 7 years from 2 people who had done him no wrong. He looked up, and his eyes found Crail across the bright and silent room. And he stole more than that, but we shall come to it. The room had gone to ice. Every eye was on Crail, and the smooth, handsome mask had cracked at last, and beneath it was something grey and small and cornered. Lies, Crail said, an old fool's senile fancy, and a heap of paper any clerk might have blotted. You cannot. This is monstrous. You cannot prove. I have proven it, said Gabriel. The hand is yours. The clerk will swear it. The drafts confirm it. And the household ledger shows the bribe you paid the man who carried both letters, an entry in your own hand that you were too proud to think anyone would ever read. It is finished, Sir Edmund. You are dismissed from the trusteeship as of this hour. My solicitors will have the keeping of every account you have touched in 20 years, and where they find what I think they will find, the law shall have you. You will leave this house tonight. You will not be received in this county again. Crail turned, perhaps to his daughter, perhaps for any ally in that cold, bright room, and found none, and last of all he found Cordelia's face. Lady Cordelia stood white and still among the holly, and she looked at her father, and at the old clerk, and at the drafts in the Duke's hand, and the whole edifice of 7 years stood revealed to her, and she had been many things, vain and sharp and cruel, but she had not known this, and her face showed that she had not. She took 1 step back from him, and then another. Cordelia, said Crail. All these years, she said low, you told me he could not love me because he was cold. You told me his heart was buried. You did not tell me you had dug the grave. She drew her skirts aside from him, as from something unclean. I wanted to be a duchess, father. I did not want to be a thief's reward. Go. I shall make my own way in the world, and it will be a cleaner one than yours. And Edmund Crail, stripped of his standing, his daughter, and his long, slow theft in a single hour, went grey and stooped and silent out of the blazing room and out of the house, and the great door closed behind him on the cold, and he was gone. The Duke of Hertmere stood a moment with the false letters in his hand, and then he laid them down, and all the hardness went out of him, and he turned to where a woman in deep blue stood at the edge of the candlelight, with a small boy's hand in hers. He crossed the room to them. The whole county watched him cross it. He went down on one knee on the floor of his own great hall, in his fine clothes, before the seamstress and her child, so that his face was level with the boy's, and he took off his glove, and very gently he took Toby's small hand in his bare one. Toby, he said, I have something to tell you, and it is the most important thing I have ever said to anyone, so I shall say it very plainly, the way you like things said. His voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it so. Do you remember you asked me in the boathouse whether a man could miss someone he had never met? And I told you yes, and that it was the loneliest missing there is. Toby nodded, grave and wide-eyed. I have been missing you, said Gabriel, for 6 years, and never knew your name. You asked your mother once for more family because it was too much to be only one boy. I've come to give you some. He drew a breath. I am your father, Toby. You are my son. You were my son when you knelt on the cobbles and offered to shine my boots, and I did not know it, and I have never in my life been so proud of anyone as I was of you that day, nor so blind. You are my son, and you will never want for anything again, nor will your mother, and I will spend the rest of my days making up to you both the years a wicked man stole from us. That is the truth, and it is yours, and no one shall ever take it from you. For a long moment Toby looked at him. The grey eyes searched the grey eyes, and the boy who forgot nothing turned the words over and over, all their longer words and their plain hard centre. "You are my father," he said slowly. "I am. My real father, that you said could miss someone he never met. That was you, missing me, and me, missing you." His lip began to tremble, and this time he did not decide not to cry. This time he let it come. "I knew there should be more of us," he said, and flung his arms around the Duke of Hartmere's neck and held on with all the strength in his small body. "I knew it. I knew it. Papa." And Gabriel gathered his son up off the floor and held him, this child he had taught to splice a rope and never known to be his own. And over the boy's dark head he found Seraphina's face, and the tears were running down it freely, and he reached out his free hand, and after a moment, after 7 years, she put hers into it, and he drew her in, and held them both, his whole stolen family, in the blazing light before all the watching world. The frost still held the next morning, hard and bright, and Seraphina walked out along the cliff path after breakfast, where the gorse stood stiff with rime, and the sea lay flat and silver to the edge of the sky. She heard his step behind her on the frozen ground, and did not turn, and after a moment Gabriel came and stood beside her, and for a while they only looked at the sea. "I owe you 7 years," he said at last. "I cannot give them back. I would give my life to give them back, and it would not buy a single morning of them. I have lain awake all night, reckoning what was taken, and there is no end to the reckoning, and there is nothing I can do but stand before you and own it. I will not ask you for anything you are not ready to give. I will wait. I have learned how to wait." She turned to him then. "I am not the girl you loved in the orchard," she said. "You should know that before you say any more. That girl trusted easily and laughed easily and held her chin high because nothing had ever taught her not to. She is gone, Gabriel. I buried her in a fishing village 7 years ago, and I will not dig her up, not even for you. The woman who is left is harder than she was, and more afraid, and she has learned to carry everything alone and does not lay it down easily. If you want her, you must want what she is now, and not grieve for what she was." "Seraphina," he said, "I knelt last night before the whole of the county and named a forger and a thief. Do you imagine I did that for the girl in the orchard? She would have wept and forgiven him. The woman who stood at the edge of my hall last night, with her chin up and her son's hand in hers, and did not flinch while I read her ruin aloud. That is the woman I love. I have spent a month falling in love with her without once knowing her name. I do not want the girl back. I want you, exactly as the years have made you. Will you have me, Seraphina Vane, as your husband in the church before God and the county, with the boy's name written into the register and the succession and the law, so that no man living can ever question his place or yours again? Will you be my wife and my duchess, and let me spend what is left of my life learning the woman you became while I was being lied to?" And Seraphina Vane, who had braced herself for ruin every morning for 7 years, looked at the man she had never stopped loving, and felt the long-held breath go out of her at last. "Yes," she said, "with longer words, I should say a great many things, but the plain centre of it is yes." He kissed her then, on the frozen cliff path above the silver sea, with the rime bright on the gorse and a single small movement beginning in the air, and as he kissed her, the snow came, soft, slow, the first flakes drifting down out of the still pale sky and off the face of the sea, settling on her dark hair and his, on the hard, frost-bound earth, falling and covering over, gently, all the cold ground of the 7 lost years. They were a long while on the cliff, when at last they came in, stamping and snow-dusted and unable to stop looking at one another. Toby was waiting for them in the breakfast room, and he had been busy. He had on his face the grave and important look of a man transacting business of state. Before him on the hearth he had laid out a cloth and a brush and a pot of blacking he had got from a bewildered boot-boy, and he stood very straight beside his arrangements, and as the Duke of Hartmere came in he held up one small hand in a manner that brooked no argument. "Papa," said Toby, "your boots are a disgrace. You have been on the cliff in the snow, and they are wet and they are dull, and that is no way for a duke to go about. Everyone will talk. Sit down, please." He gestured to the chair. "I am going to shine them." Gabriel sat down. He sat down with great gravity because his son required it, and held out one snow-wet boot, and Toby knelt before it on the cloth and set to work with the brush, his small face screwed up with concentration, the tip of his tongue between his teeth. "You shall have your penny," Gabriel said solemnly. "We made a bargain in the yard, you and I, and a bargain stands. You were to shine my boots when the stones were dry and earn it honestly. I have not forgotten." Toby looked up. The grey eyes were very bright and very like his father's, and very full of something that was not at all to do with pennies. "No," he said. "Not this time." "No, no." He bent his dark head over the boot again, brushing fierce and careful at the toe. "The first time was for a penny, because I needed to buy the tonic, and I did not know you, and a boy must earn what he can. But I know you now." He worked the brush, and would not look up, because his voice had gone unsteady and he did not want them to see, though of course they both did, and Seraphina had her hand pressed to her mouth, and the Duke of Hartmere's eyes were not dry at all. "This time it is not for a penny. This time it is because you are my papa, and I have got you back, and a boy does not charge his own father for his boots." He gave the toe one last fierce rub, and sat back on his heels, and surveyed his work, and was satisfied. "There," said Toby, "free of charge, because we are a family now, and that is what it is for." And outside the window the snow came down over the cliffs and the silver sea and the great house that was no longer dark, and inside, in the firelight, the three of them sat together over the cooling breakfast and the shining boots and laughed, and were, at long and stolen last, exactly enough of one another to go on.